This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week, two stupendous human beings, Brian Murray.
Hello.
And Kait Lamphere.
Hey.
Thank you both for joining me this week. Very excited to talk about our Goodreads Book of the Month. But before we get into that, I do want to send a warm welcome out to Erin. She's our new Goodreads mod over on our Goodreads group. If you're not a member, you should get over there, start chatting with us about comic books, offer a warm welcome, and get in on this 2020 reading challenge full of comics picked by the IRCB crew and our Patreon supporters. It's a very solid reading list this year. And I don't feel like it's as big of an undertaking as last year's for some reason. Like, I actually might finish this year. So, hooray. But otherwise, welcome Erin. I mean, I'm very excited for her to jump in and start being more moddy, I guess, in the group. She's already a great participant, but welcome Erin, I guess. That's all I wanted to say. So, we're here to talk about comic books, as always. So, let me ask the question I ask every single week. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Brian.
I've been good. I did that fun thing where I'm doing the reading challenge, so I decided right at the beginning of the month, okay, I'm going to use all my Hoopla borrows, I'm going to get the first 5 books in the list, and then I'm going to read them all over the course of January. And I've read 2 of them now, and they all check back into the library at midnight. So,
oh, nice.
So that plan is going super well.
So wait, so you borrowed these in January, or you borrowed them in February?
Or February, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to make sure. I was like, how long
it is, Mike?
That's what kind of month it's been, I gotcha.
Yeah, but I read Kara's suggestion, which is Play Tectonics, an illustrated memoir by Margot Motin. And it's a really, really enjoyable read. It's a lot of short sort of vignettes. They're all like 2 to 5 pages, roughly. And there's, sort of a narrative arc of her life, but, you'll get 2 arcs in a row that are about her new boyfriend, and then stuff about her mom, and stuff about her kid, and all that stuff. So it's a really good sort of like unfiltered look into what her life is like. And the art for it is really, really good. It's very, like, I don't want to say cartoony because that seems dismissive, but it conveys motion and expression really well. So it does almost feel like you're looking at something animated, just like stills from a TV show or something.
Yeah. I just looked up some preview art. It looks, cartoonish is very dismissive, but I understand what you mean. Like, it's a very animated style of, still work like, for a weird way to describe it.
Yeah, like because sometimes in comics it just looks like, for lack of a better phrase, a drawing of a person standing there. And other times it looks like a screenshot of a TV show or something, and this is definitely the latter. You can see the movement super well in the lines.
Absolutely.
My only gripe about it is that the lettering in it is mostly cursive.
Okay.
And I had such a hard time getting my eyes to read it. And I don't know if that's going to be just because I don't see cursive very often, or if it's like an ADHD thing, like my eyes are skipping around too much to really process. But yeah, I mean that's the only thing that keeps this book out of my god tier of comics.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can understand that weird fonts can definitely throw you for a book. I've experienced that before in the past. Kait, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
Good. I have way too many comics out of the library as usual, and a few of them were about to check back in. So I went ahead and read Hamlet and Macbeth, Shakespeare adaptations in comic book form. And the first one I want to talk about is Hamlet, adapted by Malini Roy, with art by Naresh Kumar and colors by Vijay Sharma. This one came out of India, and it seems to kind of be for educational purposes. Because it opens with a bunch of information about Shakespeare and his company of actors and the Globe Theater and the time period at which Shakespeare is active and everything like that. And then it gets into the play of Hamlet. And it seems like it's a word for word pickup of the script. I haven't read the script in a couple of years, so I could be wrong about that. But it seemed like the monologues are just as long and there's just as many subplots and things going on. My biggest complaint is that some of the characters looked really similar, and without the dialogue tags in the script, it was almost impossible to tell some of them apart. Of course, Hamlet and his family are the main characters, so as long as you can tell them apart, which I could, you still get the story. But
Right.
I do want to say that the ghost scenes where Hamlet and some of the other characters see his father, the past king, the one that was murdered, that was done really well, because you kind of get these over the shoulder shots of the character who is seeing or alternatively not seeing the ghost. So like one panel will be over Hamlet's shoulder and the next panel will be over like his uncle's shoulder, and they're seeing different things. So that was done really well. And then like the visual of the ghost was like this glowy blue outline. So that was nice.
Yeah, like a line in the sky or something that says, remember who you are. Right? That's
exactly it. Yeah. So I did like reading Shakespeare in this form, in comic book form. You kind of lose the iambic pentameter of like the break in the lines, but it's a much faster way to read it when it's broken into smaller bubbles and you can visually see what's happening instead of trying to stop and be like, what does this word mean? Like, this is Victorian English. I don't know what it means now. And then Macbeth was adapted by Gareth Hinds, and he has a couple of other Shakespeare adaptations I might check out. The rear matter in this one, he talks a lot about his process and how he really made this a more horror-oriented adaptation, so he cut out a bunch of parts that didn't inform that retelling. Of course, it was still the script. I mean, the parts that he kept were still from like the original script. He modernized it a little bit so that you didn't have to stop and be like, what does this word mean?
Right.
But again, this was a really good way to read this one. I never realized how nefarious Lady Macbeth is for some reason.
Okay.
Like, I've read this play like 3 or 4 different times, and Lady Macbeth was always just kind of like Macbeth's wife. No, she's you could call her the bad guy. Anyway.
Interesting.
She's the real power.
Yeah. The design of the 3 witches was really good, and I really enjoyed that. One of them kind of has this African design with this big antelope skull. One is more of a like a hag design, really old and shriveled, has this black veil on. And then the other one is like this hearth mother design with I want to say a ram's skull on it, much more like Scotland oriented. And if you do want to check out some Macbeth translations, but you're not necessarily into the original, prose, the way that Shakespeare writes, you could check out Toil and Trouble by Marguerite Scott, Kelly Matthews, and Nicole Matthews. And that one is entirely from the witch's perspective. It's not most of the words are not from the original script, and it's more oriented toward how Macbeth's and Banquo's actions are affecting like the land of Scotland. So if you want to check out some Shakespeare translations, but you're not actually up for Shakespeare.
Yeah. I don't know what modern movie is based on Macbeth other than the movies that are called Macbeth, so I can't make a fun cultural joke in this one. Sorry.
Yeah. But anyway, so this was great. This was like, I didn't mean to read 2 Shakespeare adaptations. I had just found them both at the library and was like, oh, I should check this out because it's been years since I read these. So it was a good time.
Very cool. Well, for me, I read... So I have an in-office book club that I think I've mentioned on the show here before. I know I've talked with folks on Discord about it and stuff. And for the month of February, we decided to do something that's not necessarily romantic love, but like platonic love between characters, like friends or family and things like that. And so for this month, we read The Girl from the Other Side, Volume 1. This is a manga written, art and drawn, colored, whatever, by Nagabe, with translations by Adrian Black and lettering by Liz Blakesley. This is like for the English translation. What's really interesting is basically the story is it's a very slow moving, well paced story about a girl and her outsider. And so the story starts with Shiva, this little girl. She's all alone in a world, and an outsider who she calls teacher is taking care of her. Why? Well, that's the question of this story. This 8-year-old girl, 8-ish, we don't really know how old she is. She's all alone waiting for her aunt to come back to her. Her aunt has gone off in something. We don't really know. We see bits of her past with her aunt being told that if she ever sees an outsider to run, and yet here she is being taken care of by her teacher. And the rule of the story is if a human touches an outsider, they'll become cursed. So So it's natural that children would want to run away, and anybody would want to run away. And as the story goes on, we don't really ever find out what it means to be cursed. We just know that it's a bad thing. And the teacher, who's this outsider, he's this void character, reminds Shiva constantly, like, not to touch him. So they whenever they need to be close to each other, there's usually like an object of some kind that they use to interact at the same time, but they never physically touch it by any capacity. And really, this is a manga like I flew through without realizing, and it's a gorgeous piece of art. Everything is drawn in heavy blacks, almost as if the story was drawn on black paper. The outsider is this slender, void-colored figure dressed in human school teacher clothing, but everything about this story is dark. It's covered in shadow, the forest, the houses, everything. The light in the story seems to only be Shiva and her innocence, which I think is a really interesting way to play up the idea of a young girl existing in this very dark, horrible world. You see this little girl's dialogue being like, she's very playful, she's very innocent, she's just a little girl trying to survive, and so the story is about her and her teacher either learning about something, trying to cook food together, trying to find food, since the teacher he seems to be able to interact with inanimate objects, sometimes living food, sometimes not. It all depends. The rules are not really clear in the book, and I think that's what makes it really compelling. And this is quite honestly one of the best manga I've read in a long while, because it's sweet and innocent and extremely haunting. I would say you could give this comic to like a younger reader, maybe someone who's like 11 or 13 or whatever, and I think they would enjoy it as much as I would, and because it creates this sense of wonder and fairy tale feeling that's also a little bit scary, but that makes it super compelling. And so I went and I read volume 1 for this book club and talked about it, and then immediately went to the comic shop and bought the next 3 volumes because it's that good. So I'm really excited to read more of it. Kait, I know you had talked about this as like your pick of the week a long while ago, and I'm glad that I finally got around to read it, because holy smokes, it is good.
Yeah, I love this book. I keep waiting for number 4 to just like magically appear at my library, and it hasn't yet. So I might just I might just pull a leaf out of your book and go buy all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're up to like volume 8 at this point that are out.
Oh my gosh.
If you can, I mean, I went to a like manga specific store and they had all 8 volumes. So I grabbed just the first 4 because I only needed 4. And we'll see if I get the rest. I mean, I'm going to get the rest, just I didn't need to spend that much money in one sitting. So, yeah, it's fucking incredible.
Just gotta do what I used to do in high school. Just go sit in Barnes and Noble.
Yeah. I could do that.
I think that this would appear to the same kind of reader as Witch Hat Atelier, which I know that you and I both also really like, but like the same age range, the same kind of like wonder and mystery behind it.
Yeah, I think this book is a little bit scarier in some capacity, but I wouldn't say that it's like a Junji Ito horror book. It just has this haunting kind of tense feeling in the background of it, but it's still very, very good. Yeah, I think I was trying to explain this to Kelly, and I was saying basically like, if you like Witch Hat Atelier, you're going to like this book. I think it has the same vibe to it, where there's a lot of mystery and a lot of slow unpacking of the lore in the book as you go on, and it feels supernatural. So, I mean, in 2 ways, I guess that was an unintended pun. But anyways, the book's really good. I highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. It's on Comixology. You can also find physical copies in bookstores. But otherwise, I quickly want to talk about another book that I read. I talked about it as my pick of the week last week, which is Alienated #1 by Simon Spurrier and art by Chris Wildgoose. And really, this book is as good as I expected it to be. Some really well-written voices, some great pacing. It feels like a teen movie action thriller. And there's some very terrible but very well written antagonists. I think this is going to be a super solid month-to-month book and an even better collected edition. If you haven't picked this up, I highly recommend it. I think it was one of the best books that came out in February, hands down. Did you guys get a chance to check this out at all? I know
I haven't yet.
Okay. I just was curious.
I don't know how many issues are out at this point, but I might just like trade weight it.
Yeah, I mean, the first issue just came out last week, so I would say, I think, like I said, I think it's going to be a good collection. It's going to be a really good month-to-month. I think Simon Spurrier, as a writer, knows how to do a well-paced month-to-month book that doesn't leave you going into the next issue going, wait, what the fuck happened last issue? I think he does a really good job of really drilling things into your head so that you remember what happens month-to-month. I think that's a really tough thing nowadays when it comes to non-big 2 books for people, is that I mean, hell, even the big two has this problem. I run into this all the time. Did I read that last issue? What exactly happened? Especially with some of the X-Men books when they're switching stories issue to issue with no clear intended purpose. I'm looking at you fucking New Mutants. But yeah, no, I think this is going to be really good. So I hope you guys get a chance to check it out. But otherwise, let's talk about comic books that are coming out this upcoming week. Comic books are dropping on February 26, 2020. What are you both excited for this week? Kate, I'm pitching back to you.
Before I get into what I'm excited about, I wanted to say that I noticed that Once and Future is getting more printings. Number 2 is on the 4th printing, and I'm somehow an issue or 2 behind, so I'm going to have to catch up with that and possibly just reread it from the beginning because I was entranced by that one. What I'm excited for that's coming out this week is called The Phantom Twin by Lisa Brown. It's published by First Second, and I have gushed over First Second before. Everything I've ever read from them is great. This one is about conjoined twins that seem to be working for a circus, but then they meet some doctor that thinks that he can separate them, and it's like successfully. And when he cuts them apart and one of them dies, and then the one that dies haunts the one that's living. And it's a really compelling idea. Like, I don't know how somebody came up with this idea. Like, oh, this has happened before in real life. I'm going to turn it into this like cute book, I guess.
Cute? Is that the right word, Kate?
Well, it's out of First Second, and everything from First Second so far that I've read has been cute. So,
well, I'm just saying, this does not sound cute. That's all.
The art is a little bit more bubbly. Like you guys had been talking about more cartoonish art. I would say like bubbly is a good word for this one. It's simple, more line work, really like round faces and everything. And it's not usually the kind of art that I go for. Usually I go for a little bit more detailed, I want to say realistic, quote unquote art. But with the plot and then this publisher, I'm gonna have to check this out.
Yeah, I mean, I still stick to this. I don't think you can go wrong with the First Second book. I've never been steered wrong by them. So I hope it's good.
Yeah, me too.
This could be the first failure. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I doubt
it. What about you, Brian? What are you excited for this week?
Well, after last week's episode, I think you sold me on Finger Guns #1.
Yes!
That one's dropping this week, for those of us who did not get your preview copies. And I am super stoked. It's this super weird concept of like the emotion influencing finger gun thing. It's so it's so unusual. It's not something that I've seen done in a comic book before. And I love the idea of taking, like that element of play that a lot of American kids have, where you're, running around going bang, bang, shooting finger guns at each other, and taking it from, what is inherently a violent route and turning it into something much more emotive. I was also promised teen angst, which followers of the show will know is entirely my shit. So I'm looking forward to see what they do in this book.
I definitely will say I don't think you're going to be disappointed, but I'm very excited to hear what you think of it after you read it. We'll definitely have to check back in on that one.
Yeah, for sure.
For me this week, I was going to pick an X book because it's all I have in my life, I guess. But I decided that I'm going to I was actually pleasantly surprised to look at the polls for next week, and I see that Heathen #9 is actually finally coming out. I don't know what the delay was, or if there was maybe they were waiting to finish the whole book before they started releasing it regularly again. But Natasha Altarisi on writing duties with the new artist Ashley Woods. It's actually coming out. I was 100% wrong about Woods being on issue #8, and I realized that when I went and read #8. So my apologies to all of you screaming into your podcast headphones saying, "Mike, you fucked up, Mike." I get it. So Ashley Woods is actually going to be on this issue. I'm just excited. Heathen is a book that I've loved since I read issue #1, and I've reread volume 1 probably 3 or 4 times. I've reread volume 2 probably twice at this point. I really, really like this book, and I just can't wait to get more of it. I think this is probably one of those. Is weirdly one of those like most anticipated books for a long time, and then unfortunately, I think just because of medical issues and stress and whatever else, the book kind of fell off. But it's coming back, just like Sex Criminals, which spoilers, that's what we're talking about today. This book kind of comes and goes, and hopefully we'll get the proper ending that this book deserves. I have full faith in Natasha Altarisi to deliver it. I think she knows exactly where this book is going, and if I'm not mistaken, it's supposed to be 18 or 24 issues or something, so maybe 12, who knows? Mike, I don't know anything about this book, apparently. I don't even know who's on it or what's working on it, so we'll see. But I know she said that at one point on her Patreon that there wasn't a definite end and it was a certain number of issues. Someone out there, please let me know. But I'm very excited for this book. It's one of the coolest concept books out there that I've read in a long time, so I will always root for it. You guys have read this book, right?
Nope.
I have it. Oh.
I have the first 2 volumes. This is one that I am trade waiting because I want it to have it like on display, being like, hey, everyone that visits my house should sit down and read this. So
yes.
It's going to be a little while before I catch up.
We got to convince Brian to get on this then. But otherwise, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about Sex Criminals Volume 1 as part of our Goodreads Book of the Month. So we're going to, get into one weird trick. And it's going to be full spoilers and very adult. We'll be back in a second. For our show this week, we are talking about Sex Criminals Volume 1, called One Weird Trick. This is written by Matt Fraction with art by Chip Zdarsky. I want to say, warning, full spoilers. We're going to be talking 18 plus this week. So this is a spoiler warning and an adult content warning. If you don't know what brimping is or how to play for queeps, we suggest reading Sex Criminals and opening your mind to the infinite possibilities of teenagers misunderstanding sex. So let's get right into this thing. Let's get deep into all of the sexual puns we're going to be making as part of this episode. Brian, Kait, what did you guys think of Volume 1 of Sex Criminals? Had you read it before? And if you did, what was your reread like? I'm going to just throw to you, Kait.
Yeah, I did read this one way back when it came out in 2014, and I remember not liking it then, but I'm wondering if that's because back in 2014, I hadn't read that many comics, so I didn't really understand that the comics can be this. They can be so unpredictable and flexible about the things that they talk about. So I feel like I was kind of weirded out that they're just like talking about orgasms and there's penises and, and now, of course, I've read way more. And so I had a good time reading it this time around.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that because I don't know if this is necessarily a great first comic for someone because of that. Like, I think Sex Criminals is really interesting for comic book readers who regularly read comic books because it is such a break from the norm of how I think a lot of comic books are written. It's very like first person, third person, depending on where we are in the story, and because it takes place in Susie's kind of mind, but at the same time it takes place in the regular, I don't know, like in a third person perspective. So because we do get to see both sides of the characters. And I mean, I know some prose books do that and all that, but it's an interesting break from, I think, like I said, from the norm of a lot of comic books. Plus, we get things like Sexual Gary. And, I don't know, Brian, what did you think of this book?
I loved this book. I also read it back when it first came out and when the first trade came out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you bought it and I read it when we were living in the house together. But
that sounds right.
It's just so funny.
Yeah.
There is so, like, especially if you're reading this book and you're not paying attention to the backgrounds, you're missing out on a lot. Mm-hmm. There's like so many of the good jokes in this book are just like what a store is called in the background, or like the I remember in one of the shelves in the porn store they go to is Obamacare.
Yeah.
For healthcare related pornography.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the things I think that sold people on this book is it's not just the actual well-written, well-constructed dialogue that creates the comedy beats, but also all of the background jokes. Like, it's clear that Chip Zdarsky and Matt Fraction were just having a fucking blast making this book because they're saying all of the like weird dick jokes and weird fart jokes and sex jokes that I think people make in their day-to-day lives, as a couple. Maybe people make these jokes, as a couple or with their friends or something, and you're actually seeing it on paper and printed in a book. It's kind of like, oh, I like these weird thoughts or these things that I thought were weird, and maybe they're not so weird. Maybe there is like some normalization of someone propping you up on a table and saying, I'm going to fuck the shit out of you. And there's like a hint of joke, like a comedy there, but also seriousness as you eventually go and bang on said table. So I don't know. I that's the thing that like really sells you about this book is how authentic it feels. And I think if you read, like I read this in single issues way back in the day, and then I reread it in single issues because I had them. I really appreciate the honesty in the back of these books. There's a lot of comedy in the letters, but some of the stuff in the first couple of issues is Matt Fraction in particular being very honest about like, yeah, some of this is kind of based on my actual, sexual experience as a younger kid or younger adult, and it's awkward as fuck. It's so fucking terrible being someone who's just like having sex with somebody and then you don't orgasm, like, but yet you still keep going with it. Like that was one of the funniest things I think in this volume was, what's his name? I'm blanking. John, thank you. John, talking about the first 2 times he had sex with this woman that he met in college, like he didn't orgasm at all. And Susie is just so shocked by that. And it's like, yeah, like this is the thing that happens. And it's that authenticity of like the weird things or the odd things that happen during sex and how everyone's sexual experience is so vastly different. And I love, like, to get beyond this volume, like they do explore a whole multitude of people and their sexual experiences to try to cover the incredibly wide range of sexual experiences for people. And of course it's impossible to do that in one book, but it's through the like letters pages and like things that happen in the book that allow people to bring their stories to the backs of these like individual issues that really makes this such a compelling book in some ways, because you start to hear more and more and more of people's sexual experiences, and then letter writers end up responding to future letter writers as people go, oh, well, this reminded me of a thing that happened to me, or here's what happens when I have sex like this. And it's like a really open, sex-positive dialogue that was started because of this book, and it's all because of all the heavy comedy to say, like, oh, look at all these weird things, I'm normalizing it, now you should feel comfortable to talk about your quote-unquote weird stuff. And I'm not trying to stigmatize anything by any means, but like the weird or funny bits of sex come out in this book, and I think it normalizes that feeling for a lot of people. Yeah, before we keep going, I kind of want to summarize what the volume was about, if that's cool. Yeah, I guess we could do that, Kate, sure. So this book starts with Susie telling her story of figuring out what the quiet place is, and basically she orgasms for the first time, and then everything around her freezes. So she can just like go and wander around and like interact with people that don't even realize that she's there. And it's only when we find out later in the story that it's only when she starts thinking like about orgasming again or sex again, and that's when time resumes normally. So if she's like someplace else that she wasn't at when this started, then that's where she's at when time resumes. And then she finally meets somebody else who can do this. And of course, I'm blanking on his name because why wouldn't I? John.
It's John.
Yeah, I don't know why. We don't have anybody's names written down in our notes, folks. Like, so John talks to her about his experiences, and you were saying like, his first experiences in college of losing his virginity and things like that. And how his experiences with this time freezing is different. He calls it Cum World, which is after a pornography store that he like snuck into as a kid when he first realized that he could freeze time. Hold on. So in my mind, I thought he called it Cum World before he saw the porn shop, because that's how like 13-year-old boys think. And then he happened to come across this shop, and I realize maybe that the story negates that, but in my headcanon of sex criminals, dumb boys just name things dumb ways. That's what it comes down to. Anyways, continue, Kate.
See, I liked Kait referring to it as The Quiet Place instead of The Quiet.
The Quiet.
Because that makes me think that every time
movie.
she gets off, she's attacked by eyeless monsters that are hunting John Krasinski or whatever his name is.
Right. John Krasinski just shows up in this frozen time world, and he's just like, "Get the fuck up!"
Anyway, sorry.
The story, the volume ends with them. They decide to rob a bank because Susie is a librarian, and the bank is shutting down her library because they can't pay the mortgage because of the United States. Anyway, so John works for this bank.
Are just fucking awful. That's also part of it.
Yeah. John works for this bank, and he hates his boss. He hates his job. So they're going to rob the bank, and then suddenly there's another character who can freeze time, and she has lackeys, and there's this whole time police thing, and her name is Kegelface.
Or they call her Kegelface at least.
One assumes she has an
real
actual name, but
No. Anyway, so that's how the book ends, is them trying to run away from Kegelface and her lackeys.
Just as they're about to get turned over to the police, too.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Kegelface somehow has a connection to the police, because I think she works for a police station.
Unclear.
And, and she basically handcuffs John and Susie, and through, fun times in this comic, they know how to get out of the handcuffs, because they're sex toy handcuffs, because why not?
Yeah.
And, so they get out and manage to run away before she can unfreeze time, essentially, and turn them over to the police. Or, really not that anyone can control freezing time, but there's a great moment where they pull out a dildo, and it starts to vibrate, or vibrator, excuse me, and it starts to vibrate, and she comes out of the quiet, and which I thought was a very funny bit, as all of the people that took them over come out, like, fall out of the quiet because they're suddenly horny again.
Yeah.
I mean, and what that all means and how it all goes is explored in further volumes, but I guess, like, the thing that makes this volume great is, like, the setup is in fucking sane. I remember reading the solicit for number 1 way back in 2014, everyone. This book started in 2014, and I couldn't believe the concept, because just looking at the title of the book, it was like, how the fuck can you get away calling a book Sex Criminals?
Yeah.
Like, I was thinking about that as I was, like, rereading this book. I'm like, on a shelf of books that you could have sitting at your house, you could eventually have a book called Sex Criminals. And I gotta imagine that raises an eyebrow for people to go, Mike, could you tell me what the fuck this is?
That's what it sounds like.
Here we are, Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's all play on words, because that's what this book is. It's full of plays on words. It's full of puns. It's full of sex jokes. It's one of the funniest books you can read, hands down.
I wanted to talk about the covers for the issues. I thought that they were really ingenious.
Oh, snap.
So
yes.
At least in the volume that I was reading, it shows you the main printed covers, like the not variant editions, before the issue starts. And they're just silhouettes with, like, a bright color and then white. And I thought that it was a super effective way for them to be able to basically show explicit art, but it's all silhouettes. And you don't like see an outline of a dick or anything like that. So it's just like them kissing or them clearly in bed or something like that. So anyway, it was a really great way to show, hey, this is what's happening in this book, but also it's not actually like XXX rated or anything on the cover. So can just be in your LCS on the shelf.
Well, it's funny you say that, because in later issues, I think maybe around issue 20, maybe earlier than that, maybe like 14 or 15, they had, like, taken hiatuses as the book was going on, and then eventually they came back and they were like, what if we started doing very explicit covers as variants, and they cost $4.69 because wink. And so they did, and they have been doing that since the series has come back. And I mean, like, they took another 9-month break very recently, and now it's coming back again, and they're still doing these, like, very, very explicit covers. I know this because I've bought every single one of them, because I gotta have them, because this book is hilarious. And also, eventually one day I have to say, here's my smut collection, son, so that my son or daughter can be ashamed of me. It's very funny. I mean, their covers have been consistently beautiful as the series is going on, and then they started doing these variant covers that are not done by Chip Zdarsky, mind you. They are done by, like, one-off artists. So we had people like Brian Lee O'Malley, we had Kate Leth, Jason Latour, Tula Lotay. I mean, like, a ton of different artists have come in and done these very sexually explicit covers just because, like I said, this is a very sex positive book, so it's not necessarily something to be ashamed of so much as like they're trying to celebrate some of the goofy sex stuff that happens in this book.
Yeah, there was a variant cover that was included in the back of the volume where the two creators posed like as if it were for like a prom shot, but they live in totally different places, so they had to like Photoshop it together. So they have these pictures of like the one guy has a stand-in that's his friend, and his friend just looks like he's like looking off to the side, super awkward, but you know, it's really cute.
Yeah, I'm sure, and if I remember correctly, like that variant sold like fucking hotcakes. I think it was like a fourth printing variant cover, and since that came out, like people have done like, okay, I'm gonna take a picture of me holding that cover with my friend, and then Matt and Chip did the same thing where they took another picture, or like I think it was Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey took a photo of them holding the two people that were holding the Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky cover, and like they kept doing it ad infinitum, and it's hilarious. I mean, I think there is somewhere a thread out there that has all of the connecting like infinity versions of those covers. That sounds like a really fun tech project where you just zoom in with your mouse and it just goes all the way down to the base, like the first one, and then as you zoom out, you get through the hundreds of different covers. Yeah, that'd be a fun project. Anyways, Brian, do you have any favorite moments in this book? Anything that like really popped out maybe on a reread for this?
I think the scene when little Susie in middle school is in the bathroom with one of the hashtag bad girls,
right,
who's telling her all about
future
sex.
Best friend.
Yeah, and she's just drawing stuff on the bathroom stall that is like supposed to be sex acts, like the kinds of things that a 13-year-old thinks might be sex acts. And there's a part where like Susie's eyes are sort of getting wider and wider, and then at a certain point she's like, I have to go. Like this has abruptly become too much for poor Susie to handle.
Yeah. I actually pulled that page up before we started recording, and like there's one that gets me every single time, and it's Queeps. And I made the joke earlier, but it is it's a guy going down on a girl, and the girl has a gun pointed at the guy's head. I don't know what it is. It is just the most absurd thing you could see drawn. And the other one that I really like is the autoerotic twerging, where it's just two naked people separated, masked, tied up, like bouncing against each other as if they would be having sex, but they are not touching at all. It's in fucking insane. But eventually the backs of these letters, the letter columns in the back of these issues, they always refer to the readers as hey brimpers, because you know, one of the sex acts is brimping, where a man has sex with a woman's hair that is pulled up above her head.
Yeah, at one of the back pages in the trade that I read was just a list of all of the terms they came up with, and even all the ones that didn't make it into the panel. So like the unrelated Godfather is one. Montezuma's Reward. Beathering.
Yep. Okay. I mean, this
self-service gas station. Oh Christ, is going to be my last one.
This is the thing that's like really wild about this book. Is it, like I said, it feels like Matt and Chip we're just having a great time putting this book together. I think there's a variant cover. I actually picked it up of. I think it was like a fourth printing variant of like a later issue where it was Matt writing an email to Chip, and it was like, hey, what if we did a book about sex? I have to find it. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I remember seeing it and just falling out of my chair laughing, because this book is absolutely hilarious, and it's probably one half uncomfortability and the other half is just like genuine comedy. I mean, like there are moments like something that that John is talking about at one point when they're talking about his like self-discovery, understanding masturbation and sex, and he says, I thought sex was something like taxes, a thing grown-ups did. I just hadn't figured out why I wanted to do my taxes so goddamn bad. And as someone who was at one point a young pubescent boy, I understand that. There's something about it. It just, you don't know what it is, but you know that you really want to do it.
See, and now that I'm 31, I really do just look forward to doing my taxes that much. because I got to get that tax refund, you know?
Right. It's somehow as good of a feeling as sex, getting that tax refund.
I mean, it's up there. Like, those are the two main ways I make my money. So
yeah, I mean, the thing that's astounding about this book is like it is a stupendous comedy, and I think it's very well written, as I've said, but it is also a really goofy concept that where like the plan to rob a bank just gets hatched based on, you know, a combination of frustration, happiness, and I think misunderstood mental illness. You know, like John's whole thing that he reveals by the end of this issue is that he has ADD with ODD. I can't remember what the ODD stands for. But it's essentially he has this thing where he feels the urge to act out beyond just, you know, like maybe screaming or yelling or something. And, you know, and he talks about how he's no longer on medication, how he has a problem. He has a problem, and I say that in heavy quotes, where he acts out, but he feels like he has it under control. He goes to yoga, he meditates, and he shits in his boss's plant as an act of defiance. It's really interesting because as this series goes on, I don't want to talk too far beyond this, but this book also becomes a discussion about mental health, I think, as the characters grow and learn more about each other, because in this first volume, you know, they spend what I think Susie calls 55 hours together. And that is like a lot of time to spend with one person in general, even when you're like married, to spend like that much time side by side doing something together. That's fucking crazy.
Yeah, see, I told you, Kait.
Yeah, I was gonna say not to say that I don't do that with my wife regularly, but like especially when you first meet someone, that's pretty wild to feel like such an attachment to someone. And I think it's good. It can be bad. I think, you know, I'm not trying to judge anybody by any means, but I think like both John and Susie point that out. Like Susie wants to stay together, and John's like, we've been together for like 2.5 days. It's okay for us to take a break because you want to keep that feeling of I want to find a reason to see you rather than just being around each other the whole time. And so as this story goes, you know, they hatch this plan as they find out more about each other, and by the time this volume ends, you know, this whatever they thought was a well-laid plan kind of falls back on them as they have an unforeseen circumstance of this other person or these other people who can go into the quiet or come world as it is. Yeah, it's. I think it's such a wild book because they're able to do this comedy, but also have some really serious moments in it, and it only gets better as the story goes on. But yeah, that's the thing I took away from this first volume, seeing all the seeds planted here in this first volume, and not to say that I don't know, like there's this huge overarching story, but like it all does connect together because it is a cohesive story. I wouldn't say this is something like a saga, for instance, where like Brian K. Vaughan is laying seeds in volume 1 that pay off in volume 8. But like Fraction and Zdarsky clearly had like a direction they were going for, and seeing this first volume kind of end with a big like what's gonna happen is great to keep you on the hook. But I also think that if the book ended right there because maybe it wasn't selling well, it wouldn't be a bad first volume, because I think it touched on a lot of things that are really important to talk about, and I don't think that we talk about it enough in the United States to get, you know, super political about it, I guess.
Yeah, well, I wanted to bring up how incredibly difficult it was for Susie to find information about orgasming or sex or anything related to bodies when she was a teenage girl trying to figure out what was happening to her. And at one point she asked her doctor, like, hey, what happens after an orgasm? And he's like, you fall asleep next to your husband. And yeah, that's pretty much... That's pretty much how it is in the United States, or at least how it was when I was that age, trying to figure out what the heck is happening to my body, or in this case, to her body. Anyway,
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree.
It's definitely a commentary on a problem in society.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all I remember about sex education when I was growing up is a lot of medical diagrams about, like, you know, a sliced open penis, you know, from the side, and, you know, like a sliced open uterus from the top, just to be like, here's what it's like on the inside. Don't put those two things together, God damn it! Like, that was the answer.
Yeah, so, the scene in Mean Girls, the don't have sex or you will get pregnant and die. Like, that was pretty much my high school sex ed class.
Yeah. I mean, and like you said, Brian, 31. I'm 31 as well. Like I would hope that in some places it's better. I know in a lot of places it's not. But to hear about Susie and John growing up, it seems like they grew up in like the 80s ish. I think is when we're putting this together. So things were probably worse then, which is kind of scary. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that Susie was in elementary school in 1991.
Okay. Someone's got a timeline. I appreciate that. Yeah, and again, this is where like the book has a really interesting like mix of things. Like there is a lot of like really interesting social commentary in the book that is peppered with a lot of comedy to make it, I think, a little bit more digestible, but also making a serious point. And as the story goes on, that becomes even more prevalent. But yeah, I don't know. I fucking love this book. This book is so much fun to read.
I wanted to talk about how this book breaks the fourth wall. So the way that it's narrated is that you see Susie's backstory of her in middle school and trying to figure out all this stuff. And normally, if a character is telling their backstory in a comic book, we see the narration in like a box or something, and then we see what happened in the past. But in this one, adult Susie is actually in the panel with child Susie, like looking at basically the camera, quote unquote, and describing what's happening. And then later on, in like I want to say issue 3 or 4, there's this scene where she's singing a Freddie Mercury song and dancing around, and they couldn't get
Fat Bottom Girls.
Yeah, they couldn't get the lyrics to include it in the comic, but they must have already done the art.
I was going to ask you guys if they were able to fix that for the trade, because in the single issues I read, they're like, maybe we'll get the license for the trade. We're not sure.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
They changed the wording a little bit to say we were trying to get it for the trade, but it never happened. So,
Gotcha.
They are talking to the reader in like what look like Post-it notes, basically over where the song lyrics would be. But they didn't change the art at all, so they still have all of these like kind of half imagined crazy dancers wearing almost nothing in the background as she's like singing, standing on a pool table. So it's still wild and crazy, but it's really it's kind of funny, but also like kind of unusual that the creators are just like talking to the reader.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think like this book it's incredibly meta aware, right? To the point where they're like, and I think there's a flash forward moment, and they're like, with the power of editing, and then they cut to another scene that's just to move the story forward. I mean, I think like it's definitely it's a book that it's aware that it's a comic book, and I think that's what makes it, I think, less awkward to read, because it feels like you're having a dialogue with the creators versus them just kind of laying it out how they think. I think they're inviting people to come in and have a conversation with them, like through the letters pages. And that's why at the end of each of these issues, like, it's fucking crazy, but they definitely have 3 to 5 pages of letters in every single issue. Especially starting with issue 2 is when the letters start coming in. And as someone who's collected all the single issues since it came out, like, it's crazy to see how many pages of letters that they had, to the point where they ended up putting out a little book called Sex Tips, which is all, I think it's some of the stuff from the back of the book. I think it's some of it with like an actual sex therapist or sex doctor. I don't know what the actual name is, but where they actually talk about, how to be safe and smart about sex and do things that you maybe didn't know about and all that stuff. I haven't read it. I just own it. Guys, I'm just a collector. I don't read any of this stuff.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I own it is like the IRCB mantra.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, did you guys back that latest Humble bundle? Because it's like 7,000 comic books for $8. Are you ever going to read any of those? Yeah. Anyways, I mean, but I don't know. Did you guys have any other favorite jokes from this book? I jotted down a handful of mine, like one of the sex tips from the letters pages, which is, when there was only one pair of footprints, that's when you were crazy bouncing on my big old rod.
I liked...
because the letters pages are just fucking full of gems like that.
I liked Sexual Gary.
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea what that is, but...
Well, at one point, it's like... it's just a poster that she's like, as Susie is flashing through all of the things that like maybe turned her on, one of them is like a poster of just some guy, and it just says "Sexual Gary" in big text, and for some reason that just became a recurring joke in the series.
Yeah, or in John's first time scene, one of the woman that he's bedding down with, one of her friends puts on music before she leaves. And they don't know, like, where the music is coming from, and they don't want to, like, stop and get up to stop it. And so through that entire deeply awkward scene, there's just somebody named Esteban crooning in the background.
Oh, yeah. And they did a perfect, like, silhouette of him, like, in the room, like in the bed with them.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. There was one that some of the lines are just... So when you pull them out of context, they're so good. Like, one of them is like, "How the hell do you rob a bank?" And John just says, "Come." But, like, it's cut off. There's more to the story, but, like, for some reason, that just tickled me for some reason. I loved it so much. There's just a lot of really ridiculous little bits. Or after the first time Susie and John have sex, you know, Susie says, you know, she notices that John's penis is glowing. And she says, "Does it feel like anything?" And she's like poking at his groin. And he says, "Feels like, you know, a dick." I don't know. To me, that's just like, I love that. Like, that, like, matter of factness is just so wonderful about this book. Like I said, it's so raw. It feels super real. Like the fucking weird conversations that you have with people in an intimate setting somehow printed into a book. Or maybe I'm having these weird conversations and nobody else is, but it made me feel like a regular person.
No, I think that, like, there is something inherently funny about sex. And I think that if you can't laugh about it, then I don't know, maybe find somebody you can laugh about it with. Like,
yeah, I think a comment that I really like about this book is that these two people are very, like, experienced in, like, their sexual lives. Like, they've had multiple partners, and so by the time they get together, you know, they understand what they like, what they don't like. And they're able to kind of goof around with this thing that I think a lot of people are very, like, super nervous about, right? Because they've found a way to be, like, comfortable with their sexual selves, you know, with their way their body looks, the way that they, you know, perform sex, for lack of a better phrase. Like, so when they're getting together, it's like they're just doing something that is considered to them, I think, super normal. And of course, in their case, it's very normal, because who wouldn't want to have an orgasm and then be able to walk around in a frozen world? Like, that's insane. It's super cool to a certain extent. I mean, we walk into a whole, like, consent thing in it, you know, I think eventually, but not about, like, sexual consent, but just, like, consent in general about anything. But yeah, it's wild. I mean, and that's, again, they normalize a lot of the sexual stuff in this book in order to get you, I think, over that hump that a lot of people have about sex. Yeah, like I said, we're gonna have some sex puns in this episode, but yeah, I like that about how these two found each other, because I think if this story were to be retold and they found each other maybe in their early 20s, like in college, this story would be completely different, because I think they were both so new to the idea of sex, especially with a partner, that maybe would have thrown them off, or maybe it would have helped them. I don't know. But, you know, the story is, you know, them in their late 20s, early 30s, something like that. And they're, you know, finding each other after they've had a lifetime or half a lifetime of sexual experiences and weird stuff and great stuff and bad stuff. And then they decide, you know what, we're going to rob a bank, because why not?
Yeah, I mean, I would have come to that conclusion a lot faster than they did.
Yeah. Need to make all my financial problems go away.
Oh, see, if I had this power, I'd probably just use it to, like, take a nap. Add more time in my day.
Yes, exactly. That's where the 8th day a week comes from, is cum world.
Mike, would I assume just do more podcast stuff?
Yeah,
I would just do more.
it's true though.
Listen, all right, like, I don't like being called out like this
on your own show,
on my own goddamn show. Anyway, so I don't know. Do you guys have any final thoughts on this? I assume you guys are going to keep reading, or you've already continued to read. But what do you have to say about, I guess, just this first volume of Sex Criminals? I'm going to start with you, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as long as you don't take sex too seriously, then I think that you'll definitely love this book. Like, just the way they treat it as like a normal, sometimes serious, sometimes funny thing that people do is, I think, a great way to look at it. So I think that as long as you can approach this subject matter with a sense of humor, I think you're going to have a good time with it.
Absolutely. Kait, what about you? Final thoughts on just volume 1 in general?
It definitely ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, and I have a whole lot of questions about Kegelface and the Time Police. So yeah, I can see continuing with this. I did want to talk about the art, particularly of the time freeze, a bit. Chip Zdarsky mentioned that it takes a whole lot of Photoshop layers to kind of add this kind of pink and blue wash onto everything with all these kind of light rivers everywhere, and it definitely shows, and it's definitely worth it. So, like, yes, there's a whole bunch of nudity, but then also, like, the art is really good.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think maybe it's unfortunate we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the art in this book, because I really do enjoy Zdarsky's art, like, quite a bit. He really manages to capture a lot of emotional faces, in ways that I think few artists can. And all of his characters, some of them have some samey looks, but on the whole, like, he made two very distinct characters in Susie and John, and I really appreciate that about, like, how real and not gorgeous these two people are. They feel like very real human beings. And I think Brian mentioned it, there's tons of little background art jokes. I mean, you got to pay attention to every single panel in this book. When there's ever a chance to, like, actually see something in the background, specifically in, like, a sex shop or in the background of a business, like, they somehow manage to throw a joke in there, and it's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, like, this first volume, going back and rereading it, I don't think I've reread it since it came out. So seeing where this whole book started, it makes me happy to know that even after 20 some issues, I feel like I never had to go back and reread this book, because everything was so distinctly stuck in my head because of how strong of a first volume this book is. I would recommend this to anybody who is, like, I think, Brian, like you said, if you're not going to take sex too seriously, this is probably the funniest goddamn book you can read. So yeah, it's a stupendous book. It's kind of unfortunate we didn't get a lot of comments on the Goodreads about this, because this was, like, overwhelmingly chosen by the group. So I'm really curious to know what other folks thought about it. So if you have any thoughts, make sure to contact us. Send us a tweet, send us an email or something. Let us know about your thoughts on this book. If you love the letters pages, if you hate this book, that's fine. Let me know. So I guess, like, to wrap things up, you can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Kait at Kait Elfier. You can follow Brian at Brian Head, and you can follow me at Mike Rappin. And the show is at IRCB Podcast, where we post things and tweets and Instagram. We also have an Instagram, same account, IRCB Podcast.
This show and our many subscriber-only episodes are powered by fans like you on Patreon. You can join us now at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast.
If you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can also join us on our Discord server at ircbpodcast.com/Discord. And, make sure to bring a friend. Tell them about our show.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Xander's a wizard, a cool guy, and a fantastic editor. He edits the show. I want to say thank you to Brian and Kait for being on this episode this week. Thank you to everyone out there who is just really cool and came and hung out with us at our hangout on Friday. That was such a blast. We were online way too late. Despite saying we were going to wrap up at 10 p.m., I think we were on till like 1 in the morning. So thank you guys so much for hanging out. That was such a great time. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.